Todos Medical investors and followers, we welcome you to the first Todos Medical Special Investor Conference. I'm Anna Berry, and I'll be your host today. Joining us for the presentation will be Gerald, Commissiong, the CEO of Todos Medical. Now, this webinar will start with a presentation, and then we'll transition to an interview-style format where I get to ask the questions. I'm so honored to host this webinar today because it looks like Todos has some really great results. Phase 2 clinical trial of Tolevir in severe to critical COVID-19 hospitalized patients to share with us. So after my interview, I'll moderate over a live Q&A session from shareholders and other interested parties. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gerald. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining. I was asked to do this by a few shareholders because they wanted to understand the new context of the company in light of the results. Obviously, they didn't know what the results were, but the expectation was that they were positive, and I think that's definitely right. So I'm going to just touch briefly on where the company is positioned now in relationship to all of the other things that we had talked about doing before, now that this binary event is behind us, and we can really start to plot out what the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months look like as we bring more products into the marketplace and have additional opportunities for revenue generation. So these are our safe harbor. So just a reminder that Todos is not only a therapeutics company. In fact, the company is really built upon diagnostics and using the diagnostics to identify pathways that allow for intervention with immune support, as well as intervention with therapeutics. So our main therapeutic asset that we're very excited about is our oral antiviral COVID-19 candidate called Tolevir. It's pursuing a huge market. The estimates are that Pfizer is going to generate somewhere between $10 and $20 billion with their pill. Merck is somewhere in the $3 to $5 billion range. So we're already talking about a $15 to $30 billion market for oral antivirals, for which there really are only 2 candidates in the market, both of which have challenges. And so, we're coming to the table with what we think is something that could be as good, if not better, and certainly better in the specific circumstances that we've been looking at it, because there's now a clear need for oral antivirals later stage in disease and in the hospital. In fact, we've seen Gilead start to think about and pursue the development of an oral antiviral version of remdesivir, which I'll talk about in the data about the Tolevir study. So with all that, it's very clear oral antivirals, that's the future. In fact, the way I look at it, the pills are going to end the pandemic because you get sick, you take a pill, you get better. That's the way it works for many, many other diseases, and that's how it can work with COVID. The key, of course, is having pills that work, and we think we have one. With that, as the flag at this point for the company, obviously the company's base is around diagnostics, where we have new technologies in cancer and Alzheimer's, also in COVID detection. All of that is really built around immunodiagnostics, allowing us to identify disease earlier and monitor the progression in different ways than typical markers can. All of this IP is protected from these novel technologies that we've developed, and we have significant competitive advantages in cancer, in Alzheimer's, and in COVID. So we're very happy about that. And of course, this all is, I wouldn't say pie in the sky now. I think it's very real, but it's built upon a base, a revenue base that is strong and growing. And that base is the PCR testing business that we have. That's the bread and butter of the company that is allowing us to continue to grow in new ways so that we don't have to necessarily tap the equity markets as we move forward. And that's a big part of our overall strategy, and now can serve as a bridge to the potential revenue that we see coming in from some of our therapeutic candidates and our dietary supplements that we now see a big upside for. So just a reminder, COVID's still out there. I don't think anybody forgot about that. Obviously, many, many people are vaccinated. Problem is that the vaccines don't seem to be very strong in protecting against infection with some of these new variants that are emerging that are able to overcome the immunity from infection. So now the repositioning is around obviously reducing severity, potentially reducing long-term issues related to long COVID. And this is the new reality we're dealing with. And as we deal with that new reality, and as people get out into the world, they're going to get sick. Many, many people are getting sick. And what they're finding is they're not always getting better. And so the notion that it'll go away is not true. And so the need for the oral antivirals is still paramount. We know that there are 16 million Americans, over 80, for whom the vaccines themselves, even before Omicron, had relatively little ability to prevent against infection. And these are the people that are most likely to end up in the hospital. We also know that a huge number of Americans, 10 million plus, are immune compromised. And that number actually, as we're finding out with COVID, is actually much bigger. COVID is actually the trigger now for people realizing that they have immunity issues or autoimmune issues. And so as this reality begins to set in and people start to question, where do we go from here? The U.S. government has already made their decision. And we think it's quite clear that not only the U.S. government, but other governments are following suit, and we're starting to hear from them now. Oral antivirals are the solution to that problem. If you can find people early and you can get in and treat them with something that kills the virus, then you have an opportunity to stop the potential longer-term side effects. You have an opportunity to reduce the time that people are out from work or out from school, and you can get people back to a normal life, which will be more inconvenient than, say, a common cold that might go away on its own in a few days. But if COVID goes away on its own in a few days, then maybe that could become our new reality. And just to underscore what's really going on here, the U.S. government has ordered, in terms of 10 figures worth of pills that they intend to distribute. And I expect that number is going to go up as new variants eventually come on board. We're now hearing about Omicron 2, which early studies are suggesting is 50% more transmissible than Omicron 1. And as that happens, and as the inevitable new variant that overcomes even that immunity emerges, we really need to start getting serious about tackling therapeutics, especially in light of the monoclonal antibodies coming onto the market. So with that in mind, we're going to have 3 points. Now we have the revenue-producing assets from our legacy and now bread and butter COVID testing business. We do both testing services and testing supplies. In the testing services business, what we do is PCR testing. We have spent millions of dollars automating our CLIA cap lab that exists at Provista Diagnostics down in Alpharetta, Georgia. And we are now have the automation to do well over 10,000 tests per day. I think we can easily get up to 20,000 tests per day once we get a second shift fully booked up. And we've been spending a lot of time building out the staff down there to be able to handle that capacity at scale. People that know what they're doing can really handle it. And I'll talk about one of the new hires that's been able to help in that direction, new general manager at Provista. We have a turnkey solution. We are spending now a lot of time and effort making sure that all the IT software, so we can rapidly get people scanned in and get the sample right on the machine for operations. That's the next major challenge. Integrating with a lot of other softwares of different groups that we are, now starting to process samples for. And we like that challenge because that means that volume is growing. We're also developing a lot of relationships with doctors. And a year ago, I predicted that, corporate wellness programs and companies were going to be the drivers of testing, and schools were going to be the drivers. I was a year early, but it is happening. And it's exciting to see from our perspective because, we can actually help these people who right now are having big time problems because the labs just aren't equipped to handle the volume that's coming based upon what we've seen and what's coming next with Omicron 2 and the next set of variants. Additionally, we do also do CPAth neutralizing antibody testing out of this lab. It's something that has been relatively unimportant from a revenue perspective for a long time. While we, again, we were very early in this, but we felt it was critical to establish ourselves as thought leaders in the setting of neutralizing antibody testing, because it is inevitable that there's going to be a lot of fights around people getting boosted after they've had COVID. And with the emergence of the Omicron variant and people already dissatisfied with the vaccines because they got COVID, despite the fact that they were fully vaccinated or boosted, the likelihood that someone's going to go in and get another booster after having just gotten COVID, which demonstrated that the shot had challenges in terms of protecting them, is low. So spike proteins aren't good for you. Obviously, if you're going to encounter spike proteins, which most people are, you would much rather do it from the vaccine than you would from the virus. With that being said, if you've already had the vaccine and the virus, like most of Americans within the next 45 to 60 days will have encountered, you're now in a position where they're talking about changing the definition of fully vaccinated to include 3 shots. And if you just had COVID, I think that's going to be something that many, many, many people will have challenges with. And I think the demand for neutralizing antibody testing to serve as a proxy for a hypersensitive cellular response, because the cells are what create the antibodies, I think that's coming. And I think sooner or later, this waterfall will break, and we will see this dam will break, and we'll see a lot of water come down in terms of people wanting to know their antibody levels. We've started to now have parents of kids who have had COVID start to ask about, well, where are my levels, and what does this look like in comparison with the vaccine? Certainly, we're not recommending against vaccination, but I do think it is important for parents to consider, if I do have a lot of antibodies, what is the risk of autoantibodies? Because that's where you find out. A lot of people are finding out they have autoimmunity. The next major thing we're doing is we're supplying other labs. And in fact, some of the labs we're supplying don't have our capacity with our equipment. And so, they're referencing to us. So it's a very synergistic model. Whatever they can't do in-house, they send to us. And this is something that we think is a good model. It helps them as they grow, and we can continue to supply them as they grow. But for us, we really want to build ourselves up as a regional lab capable of doing large volume and helping and servicing our clients as they grow. To meet, the lumpiness that they have with our testing capacity is now something that is very meaningful for our business. So this was the majority of our revenue in 2021. We think it will be the minority. It'll move into the minority phase of our revenue, and that really the Provista testing is going to become the key. So when you look at, our revenue through the first 3 quarters of 2021, it's up 7x. Versus 2020, and we expect to see continued increase in revenue, both from testing at our own lab, which is now making up a majority of our revenue as compared to servicing other labs, as well as continuing the legacy clients, some of which may ultimately become acquisition targets. And then importantly, and we didn't talk about this from a revenue perspective, we talked late in the third quarter about our Tolavid dietary supplement products that I'm going to talk about in a moment becoming material to the business in the fourth quarter of 2020, and that did in fact happen. So we're very excited to see that as this opens up new market opportunity, and with some of the other things we're doing on the 3CL protease biology side, it's making this potentially very lucrative for us. So as we move now away from the testing and moving into what we're doing in terms of dietary supplements, therapeutic drug candidates, and then new tests in COVID, we really all need to be talking about 3CL Sciences as we're completing the joint venture agreement, 60-40 in our favor with NLC Pharma, and we'll be working hand in hand with Dr. Arad to bring this forward. So with regards to Tolavid, as many of you know who've been listening to this for some time, Tolavid is a dietary supplement made up of plant root extract that has potent 3CL protease inhibiting activity. And I won't get into what that is on this slide, but suffice it to say that the 3CL protease is becoming increasingly important in biology, and it is certainly something that is very important for immune support. So we are the only product on the market that has a 3-cell protease inhibition claim. And I think that that's starting to get recognized as we are seeing in the month of January already 50% of what we made in revenue for all of 2021. We are beginning to market this product more heavily. We've invested in artificial intelligence marketing. We've hired a senior marketing executive from Merck and Novartis, who also has consumer products experience at Unilever. And we're building out our marketing team to be able to drive this forward. And we now have more than enough volume in terms of material to really have an organic grow. So previously, we didn't want to push the marketing because we were concerned about running out. That's no longer our problem. We built up our supply chains for a number of reasons as it relates to these raw materials, and we're now ready to deliver. Tolovit sells for $299 on Amazon, at mytolovit.com, and Alibaba. And our marketing team has put a number of promotions together to make it attractive for people to start taking Tolovit and start to recognize the immune support and the freedom that you get as a result of taking this product. We also have a second product, which doesn't have as much 3-cell protease inhibition activity in it, but still provides good immune support and is also one of the only products between our Tolovit and our Tolovit Daily, are the only 2 products in the market that have this 3-cell protease inhibition activity. So we sell this online at mytolovit.com, on Alibaba and Amazon. This is $99 a bottle, and this is really for the person on the go. The first Tolovit at $299, that's for maximum support when you need it the most, but that's really over a short period of time, a 5-day dosing regimen. This Tolovit Daily is something that you can take over, several days, or, it's a twice daily dosing regimen over a month. If, people are going out in crowds and they feel they need a little additional immune support, you can take more than what's on the bottle. There's no safety concerns with that. And we've also now heard of people, and we got a label for the Tolovit Max in a twice daily dosing as well. There's no safety concerns there either. So, these are important products. Obviously, the Max is significantly more potent than the Daily, but the Daily is still one of the best products actually on the market that you can get today. And we think that it is important for people to understand that they can get this product and they can really support their immune system in times of need. Now, leaving the dietary supplement products behind us, because those products are not approved by the FDA to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure any disease, but they are approved as 3-cell protease inhibitors and as immune support. Now we'll talk about the role of the 3-cell protease itself, how it interplays with the immune system, and how, from a botanical drug candidate, we're going after COVID-19, not with the Tolovit or the Tolovit Daily product, because that is not therapeutic, but with our Tolovir product. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the 3-cell protease, what does it do? It really facilitates a number of aspects of viral activity with regards to coronaviruses. One of its key activities is that it cleaves polyproteins into smaller active proteins that are then able to go out and infect other cells. So this is how viruses replicate. It's how they get out of the cell. It's how they go and infect other cells and take over the host, which is your body. So inhibiting this ability of the virus to take over your body obviously is very important. We think doing it as early as possible when the virus, when a coronavirus is in your body, is also extremely important. And we're starting to see publications come out supporting that. And also getting rid of it once you've been infected and potentially recovered is also critically important, because as we've suspected for some time, there are reservoirs and the virus can hang around. And we're starting to hear a lot about long COVID becoming a bigger and bigger public health issue. So one of the other things that the 3-cell protease does is it actually turns off your immune system. It turns off your local a certain aspect of your local immunity at the cellular level by cleaving a cell surface receptor called NFK beta essential modulator, or NEMO. NEMO is a cell surface receptor for NFK beta. NFK beta is kind of like the cell's local alarm system. When that gets activated from a signal transduction perspective, it turns on a number of local processes to try and stop the invasion of by the 3CL protease and viruses associated with it. And not only that, but those two things together have potentially a role in hyperstimulating the immune system. If you have a lot of virus and then your body is downregulated in terms of its alarm system, it doesn't figure out that it has a lot of virus for a long time, as is in the case of COVID. Once it figures it out, it over-responds. And that over-response can lead to significant symptoms, and that's what we see in COVID-19. It can also lead to cytokine storm, and that can be deadly. That's what we treat in the hospital. So when you look at the 3CL protease, you cannot look at it solely as a treatment for the virus. In the right context, it can also, at the right time, it can also help in other aspects of the virus. With that said, it can't do it alone. And that's one of the reasons why we are not looking only at the 3CL protease as our antiviral. We have a dual mechanism antiviral that includes the 3CL protease and a specific anti-cytokine compound to be able to reverse the clock in the hospital. Stop the thing that's causing your body the harm and stop the harm that your body is causing to itself at the same time, and giving yourself a chance to breathe, to respond, to mount an immune response, as well as stopping the virus from replicating so that you can get back on your feet and you can get back to normal. Now, in terms of what we do with this, the 3CL protease, obviously, not all inhibitors are created equal, and that's really important to understand. Not everything is the same. So you hear people talk about ivermectin as a 3CL protease inhibitor. That is true. However, it's extremely weak. And because you have to take so much of it in order to have a very strong activity, it can lead to side effects. And that's really, what's going on with the FDA when they say that it's potentially dangerous to take it. In and of itself, it's not dangerous. But if you want to actually have a benefit, you have to take so much of it, it can become dangerous. So where you see, people saying that it may have some benefit is in the earliest stages of infection. And that could be true. The problem, of course, is very difficult to know when you're at the very earliest stages of infection, unless you have a very robust serial testing program. With that said, Tolivit daily does have much stronger inhibition activity. So even our weakest product has much stronger 3CL protease inhibition activity than ivermectin. And our Tolivit max is 10 times stronger than our Tolivit daily. And our Tolivir is twice as strong as our Tolivit max. So, when you look at the gradient of the product, you really want to get down into something that's at the near micromolar, nanomolar border. And that's where Tolivit max, Tolivir, and then you get to a chemical drug, Paxlovid, which is Pfizer's compound, that has very, very strong binding affinity, but that comes with other issues. And so, while Pfizer certainly has a tremendous drug, it's not going to end up being for everybody. And it's certainly not going to be for everybody at every stage of disease, as it's only approved to treat people in the first 5 days. We see our Tolivir having much, much bigger window of treatment. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit about the data that we released today that kind of proves that. So, we think we can treat people in the hospital with Tolivir, but it's not limited there. We think we can also treat people very early. And really having a 3CL protease inhibitor in your system as early as possible when you encounter the virus is the best thing you can do for yourself to protect yourself and your family. So in terms of the next steps in looking at Tolivir and where it fits within the paradigm, we're soon going to be changing the temple slide to Gilead, because we've now seen that Gilead is developing a oral antiviral version of remdesivir. But with that said, just looking at the roster we have up here, we just completed phase 2 data. I'll show it in a moment. We felt the results were very strong. It met virtually every endpoint that we looked at, and it did so in a very meaningful way. So very strong signal. It wasn't powered to meet US FDA authorization standards, but the interim data that we saw certainly was robust enough for all of our advisors and our clinicians to recommend stopping the study. We're now making it available on compassionate use to people in the hospital in Israel who were using it at Shahid Zedek in Jerusalem, who had a great team. Ariel Roca, the PI on the study, was phenomenal. The team at Shahid Zedek was phenomenal in terms of working and helping us put all of this together, and we thank them tremendously for their work. Now, as you can see, we're the only oral antiviral, to my knowledge, on the planet that has shown positive data in a hospitalized setting in COVID-19. And so we think, as I mentioned, because we're going after 3-cell protease antiviral mechanism with a strong binding affinity, that we will also have ability to go outside the hospital in the moderate severe setting, in the outpatient setting. Because of its tremendous safety profile, we can go into the pediatric setting. And as discussed previously, we think getting rid of that virus from a long COVID perspective is critically important. And we know that you can dose this compound chronically with no side effects. We're very, very confident in that. So as we look to continue the development of this botanical drug candidate, and we compare it with what else is out there, obviously Pfizer is the market leader. They showed a very strong reduction of deterioration of hospitalization when you start taking the pills within 5 days of symptoms, with a positive test, of course, and that's a challenge because of the nature of that product. You have to have a positive test to take it, and tests, as we know, are challenging to get. Especially, you can't use the at-home test. You have to use something that's supervised. With that said, there are challenges with the compound. One, obviously, is the window, the 5 days. The other challenge is that there are drug-drug interactions. And so the people who actually are likely to do the worst are people who are taking multiple medications and have multiple risk factors. Those are the people for which they're least likely to be able to use this compound, or they'll use it, but they'll stop taking their other meds for a period of time. And when you have COVID, obviously that could present a risk. So, Pfizer's compound is a very important product, but by no means do we think it's the end-all be-all for a pandemic. And we think that we can compete favorably with that in multiple settings. And we're going after that right now. Merck's compound also is now approved by the FDA, just like Pfizer, on an emergency use authorization basis. Does not have as much efficacy, and there are other potentially more significant risks associated with Merck's compound. And so while it's certainly being used in the developing world, and unfortunately it's being misused in the developing world, and I think ultimately there are going to be a lot of bad stories that come out of that. Here in the U.S. And other developed countries, it is being used sparingly. And we do think that most governments want to see alternatives to that could be more beneficial. And then we have Adamis' compound, which is in phase 2/3 now. They're expected to read out on some data on the phase 2/3 in an outpatient setting sometime, I believe, in Q2. And they do have dual mechanism, RDRP, which is similar to mutagenesis, but not quite as strong, and the anti-cytokine. And so they're going after the moderate, keeping people out of the hospital. It remains to be seen whether the RDRP is significant enough to stop the feedback loop that we see in the hospital, and whether that's the same a little bit earlier, right before you go to the hospital. So there are 4 options here, and we now know that Gilead is using their remdesivir compound, which did not, even though it's the standard of care in the hospital, didn't have great benefit, but it is starting to show better benefit outside the hospital. The problem with that is that it has issues related to delivery because it's an IV compound, so they're turning it into oral. And we'll see oftentimes when you move from an IV drug to an oral drug, you lose efficacy. So with all this said, we remain an oral antiviral, the only oral antiviral that has shown strong activity in the hospital setting. And we're very excited to take this forward. Hopefully, as we've already started engaging with governments about the potential to use this in an emergency use setting relatively rapidly. And we're definitely moving to get into a more robust clinical setting so we can engage with governments that are going to want to see more data. We know the situation is evolving. We do think our safety profile definitely gives us a leg up because there are no known safety concerns with this compound. We've just been able to identify a way to know which routes are the ones that really are going to help you versus the duds. And the duds are the reason why you see variability in the literature around the use of some of these. Because we've positioned it this way, because we have discovered the compounds within our formulation, we think we're really in a great position to have life cycle management, not only in the botanical drug, but also in the next generation chemical that will be the long-standing play as we build out the oral antiviral franchise of Tolovir. Now, talking a little bit about the data here, of course, is the key data that we reported today. We had in the last 20 subjects, which is the second cohort of the study, that's where we fine-tuned the dosing regimen, the formulation for Tolovir. And what we saw, of course, was very, very, in our opinion, very impressive. We saw reduction of time until people got better and stable by the internationally recognized National Emergency Warning System 2 metric. So we saw almost 3 days faster stabilization in the hospital. Remember, this is a hospital setting where patients have already deteriorated to such a state that they have symptoms that they feel they cannot go on staying at home. As we all know, most people will do anything to stay out of the hospital. These people have passed that point and they're now in the hospital. And we're able to help them get to improve 3 days faster than placebo alone. And placebo alone in our setting included remdesivir. So all of these patients, both treatment and placebo, got remdesivir because that's the standard of care. So we had 3 days better in that setting. From a median perspective, it was even bigger. In terms of days in the hospital, total days in the hospital, we had 7-day benefit in the hospital on average. So that obviously is quite impressive from our perspective. And then time to discharge, this did not include people who passed away. And when you look at the numbers, the change of in the placebo from 17.8 to 8.3 with 3 patients who passed away, unfortunately, I'll talk about that in a moment. What that means is that 3 out of 9 added more than doubled the time that they were in the hospital. And that's really the issue that we see is that, if you're deteriorating and you stay in the hospital for a long time, if an average patient is discharged in 10 days, but the people who stay in the hospital are there for 40, 50, 60 days, they're taking the resources of 4, 5, or 6 patients. So if you can reduce that and make sure in a more reliable basis and get them out of the hospital, they're likely not to die, one, and they're likely to be better off and less expensive. And that's really what we think is the key. So time in the hospital, definite benefit. And we understand why time to discharge is not as much. It's because those patients who do die are really there for a long time. And that's what you're trying to avoid. Now, when you think about patients who deteriorate to mechanical ventilation, obviously those are most likely the patients who are going to pass away. And we saw that 33% of the patients in the placebo group did that. Only 9% of the patients did that in the Tolovir arm. So there was a very significant reduction of 9 over 33 minus 1. So, it's somewhere close to 75% reduction of patients who deteriorated to mechanical ventilation on a percentage basis. Similarly, there were 0 COVID-19 related deaths in our study arm versus 2 in the placebo group. That means 22% deaths in the placebo group. So that is quite significant. The reason it's so significant is that that's actually becoming the standard that we're seeing. So, somewhere around this 20%. Once you get to a certain place where you go to the hospital, and being able to overcome that is quite important. It's important to know this was during the Delta wave. We know obviously the Omicron wave doesn't have this level of death associated with it. With that said, it has many more patients. So while the percentages are not as high, the sheer volume of patients is. And so that's something that, we obviously have to pay attention to. Here, when we talk about total deaths, there was a death in the treatment arm. However, as noted below, that was a patient who actually had a stroke before they were even enrolled in the study. And it wasn't known to the investigator. That patient was able, once they were stabilized, to get the Tolovir product given to them in their feeding tube. So yes, it's an oral antiviral, but it can be administered in the feeding tube so that people who are on ventilation can get it. And that patient, despite the stroke and the terrible condition they were in with very, very high D-dimer, they got to stable disease. So they were a perfect responder, which is why we had 11 out of 11 improve. So that to us was obviously very meaningful. Unfortunately, we were only able to treat for 10 days. And this was a very sad situation where we didn't know if the patient was on placebo or drug at the time, but we suspected, given the improvement, that they could be on drug, and in fact they turned out to be. And unfortunately, we couldn't continue to treat them, and they passed, but not related to COVID-19. So strokes unfortunately do happen, and bad things happen in trials like this. But it is a lesson that going forward we would likely continue to treat a patient. Because there are no safety risks, so there's no real reason not to treat them if they're still, in not a good state. We want to make sure that virus doesn't come back after they stabilize. In terms of other endpoints, need for supplemental oxygen, there was slightly fewer patients in the Tolovir on a percentage basis in the Tolovir arm than in the placebo arm. But what was really important is that the patients that did end up on ventilation were on supplemental oxygen for a much shorter period of time. That is really the key. Reducing the time that people are using these things leads to better outcomes. So that was very, very beneficial. And the other things that we're seeing across the board, and I won't get into too much detail, but in terms of CRP, in terms of IL-6, in terms of D-dimer, that are all predictors of bad outcomes in COVID-19, they were much lower after the 10 days of treatment on the treatment arm than they were in the placebo arm. So all in all, I can say that the data, while not powered sufficiently to really get a result that you would want to see for an approvable endpoint at the FDA, certainly the strength of the data, we saw reduced time to improvement, reduced time in the hospital. We eliminated COVID-19 death. We reduced deterioration to mechanical ventilation. Again, the one patient who did deteriorate to mechanical ventilation on the Tolovir had a stroke. And that could have obviously had a significant impact there. And we also saw reduced use of supplemental oxygen in the Tolovir group. So all of this really, bodes well. We have our Tolovid products that are now really picking up steam in terms of revenue, and we're going to start driving those forward with regards to marketing. We are sponsoring a couple of events at the Super Bowl this year, and we are speaking with some athletes who are very, very interested in having the Tolovid product to support their immune system, to help keep them in the game with their immune support. And now we see a second layer coming on with the Tolovir data. And really, the key for us, of course, is that, we saw this before in a different study, but an observational study of this compound or the formulations associated with it in Israel in 2020. So we saw, reduction in time in the hospital by about 25%, which is similar. So 2.7 to 3 days. That's what we saw. We saw that kind of range of reduction. We saw that no one died from COVID-19 in our group. Similarly, the same thing happened in the current study. We saw that many fewer people deteriorated to respirator. That again, not surprising to us. And then a reduction in CRP. As noted as a biomarker trending in the right direction. So really now we have two studies, one observational and one double-blind placebo-controlled randomized, that are both showing the same thing, that these materials are helping people who have COVID-19 in the hospital get better faster, stop them from dying, and get them out of the hospital and using supplemental oxygen to be able to live on their own. And that's obviously great. The background is obviously we've used this, the overall product, but now with a lot more science that we've put into it for quite some time. We know there's a potent anti-3CL protease inhibiting compound that was discovered by Dr. Arad through our work with her in the last year, and that's really what helped us change the formulation from part 1 of part 2 to part 2 of the study, and that's where we saw a big benefit. Obviously, the Delta wave in part 2 was a great challenge to Tolovir. That was obviously the most deadly variant we've seen to date, and we feel very, very good that, if we are able to hold up against Delta, we certainly think we can hold up against Omicron. Also this anti-cytokine activity, we think it's having a significant impact, and why we may see a much better benefit in our product versus if Pfizer went in with just the protease inhibition activity alone. And we measured this, and we're monitoring this by the reduction in the biomarkers. And obviously in the next set of studies, we're going to have robust analyses of all these biomarkers. There is still ongoing analysis in the current study, so we're going to come back in a few weeks with a much larger data set around those biomarkers. But regardless of that, in the next study, I think that's going to be key as we engage with regulatory agencies. So Dr. Jules Mitchell is a clinical trial advisor. He's been a regulatory advisor. He was great to work with, and he brought in a great statistician, Luis Rojas. So we had really professionals helping us and make this really a strong data set that we can engage regulatory agencies with. So now we're going to be looking at an EUA path based on this data in certain jurisdictions where there's a lot of need. And we're looking at a phase 2-3 study for other jurisdictions that may require greater proof in terms of numbers of patients. And if we can mirror the data that we saw in these last 2 studies, we think that, we really have something, and we can make a significant amount of noise in this huge oral antiviral market for COVID-19. And then finally, it's something that we've worked on, but we had to kind of put it on the back burner a little bit due to resources. We are developing a new test, so not antigen, not PCR, but TOLA test based on the 3CL protease. We think that this is likely to be more sensitive, both on the front end and picking up people earlier, and on the back end and telling you when you're not actually infectious. Right now, you're using proxies like CT value, which are not even reporting from clinical labs, or negative antigen tests, which is not really a great proxy for infectiousness, although it is better than nothing. So I do give people who are really pushing forward with the antigen test and the rapid tests, I understand why they're doing it. And I think there's definitely a place for it right now in the absence of something better. But we think we have that something better that we can bring to market. And we're excited to bring this forward to solve the problems that we have with COVID-19. And then finally, I'm just going to touch base on our proprietary diagnostics. We have our breast cancer test, Videssa. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about this because of just everything that's going on in COVID. But if this were a standalone company, we think that this could be tremendous. Over $50 million went into the development of Videssa, and it's going after a huge market opportunity. So the post-mammogram testing market, which is just one of the markets that we're going after with Vadesa, is $7 billion plus, and there's really no adequate standard of care. So if a woman has a dense breast and she has an inconclusive mammogram for the 4th mammogram in a row, they're going to send her most likely to get a biopsy for the 4th time in a row. And for the 4th time in a row, most likely that biopsy will be negative. There'll be a lot of anxiety along the way. There'll be a lot of cost on the way. And there'll be a lot of risk along the way. And we think that Videssa could potentially help with that. Why do we think that? Because we have prospective data in over 1,000 patients gathered that show very high sensitivity and very good negative predictive value. We did these studies at some of the best centers in the world: Harvard, Stanford, Scripps, Avera Health, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic. These centers do great work, and this is also one of the key reasons why we have great confidence in the Videssa assay. If you look at what this could mean for women and what this could mean for the industry as a whole in terms of reducing a lot of negative externalities, you could potentially reduce the number of biopsies by 45%, which is a huge number. And this obviously didn't just come out of thin air. A lot of money was invested to bring Videssa to where it is today, over $50 million. And we stand to benefit that. We were able to strategically acquire this asset because it fits well with our other breast cancer testing technology. Now, we also have a blood test for Alzheimer's disease. We're currently funding a study to confirm data that we saw in the first cohort, where we had an extremely high correlation between lympro scores and amyloid PET imaging, SUVR. The correlation was 0.00002 p-value with an R of 0.85. And on that R, there were several outliers, both on the 0 and the 1 axis. And so we think it actually, if you looked at it, it's even a higher correlation than you would imagine. So we have that second cohort of data that's going to be coming out, and we're very excited for that, because there's definitely a need for better diagnostics in Alzheimer's, especially as start to see more and more therapies get on the market with questionable benefit. You want to get these people tested to see which one of these therapies is really working. And then finally, on the back of both our kind of proteomic Videssa test and our proteomic Lympro test, we have our AI-based cancer screening test, TBIA. And what this can do ultimately is do machine learning and continue to build out new data sets. So we have a CE mark in breast cancer for this. It's a blood test. We have a CE mark in colorectal cancer, also as a blood test. We think we can expand that to many, many more tests. And really the only rate limiting step for us is to be able to acquire enough samples and correlate them with the right disease state to be able to look at this. So we're very excited. So when we think now about, Todos as a company, we've got revenue today. We've got testing revenue that is setting the stage for when we launch our Vadesa test in the future. We have distribution revenue, which sets the stage for when we commercialize Videssa and some of our other assays on a distribution basis. We have a dietary supplement revenue that is based upon 3CL protease biology, and we're now in the process of looking at ways to use the real-world data that is being generated. So we're looking to reach out to some of our clients, and we're working on an IRB and other things to be able to capture some data to understand what kind of claims we might be able to add to the Tolavid and Tolavid daily products based upon the real world evidence, people really using it and telling us how they did. We know the new FDA commissioner coming in is a big fan of real world evidence. Dr. Mitchell is friendly with that person. And we're hopeful that as we build out our data sets for Tolavir and we demonstrate efficacy in the hospital, that a different formulation, the Tolavid product, which is a dietary supplement, could one day become an OTC drug. So that's something that we think could be important. It's on the shelves. Once it has that approval, then it could be used upon a positive test. But right now it does not have that approval. So it's, limited for use as an immune supplement. So a little bit about the team that's really been driving this forward. Very pleased now, especially with the data and some of the things that are coming up. We've added Dr. Dorita Rod, who's a CTO, not the CTL, the CTO of NLC Pharma. She's really the driver behind all of our Tolo 3CL biology product candidates. She's a great woman, and the science that she's brought forward is really, really something special, and we think it could help change the world, especially with COVID. Dr. Jorge Leon, he is actually has had a hand in every single breast cancer test approval in the United States outside of mammograms, and he's very excited about our Videssa test. And Dr. Paula Trapaz, who was at Eli Lilly and helped commercialize the first diagnostic for Alzheimer's disease, Amyvid. And, we haven't done as much with her recently, but as we get closer to data and we have a few more resources due to the revenue we're generating, we think we can really start to ramp up that operation. And obviously we have Dr. Elise Brownell, been working with for years, who are VP of Research and Development, really keeping everything going. And importantly, as I noted, our new hire, Dr. Pankaj Seth, he was the general manager of Provista Labs. We were able to recruit him away from Eurofins, which obviously is a very big company, because he sees the opportunity growing at Provista with the revenue base. He can help build that revenue and put the systems in place. That's what has been going on over the last month and a half, and also set the stage for many, many other tests in preparation for Videssa. So all the other complementary cancer screening tests that you would want to see, Pankaj has done this before. He has brought them into the market. He's brought them into production. He's made deals. He's built labs. And so we have confidence that he can do it again. And then obviously Valentino Smith, our VP of Marketing, he's got consumer packaged good experience. He's got drug commercialization experience at both Merck and Novartis, launching brands and managing brands of actual drug products. And so he brings a unique skill set to our dietary supplement and our botanical drug candidates. So in summary, we have proprietary technology platforms across the board in diagnostics and therapeutics and in immune support, because the immune support products that people think they can just buy the raw materials, they don't know how to qualify to know which raw materials have the protease inhibition. And that is our proprietary method. And we also have discovered the compounds within that so they can be isolated. And we can do other things with them, and as we build out our franchise. We've got scalable replicable models. So we've now scaled PCR testing in our own lab. We've scaled PCR testing in other labs. We're scaling our dietary supplement products, and we intend to scale our botanical drug candidates and ultimately scale our proprietary diagnostics. So we have done this before. It's not something that we're thinking about doing, and we will do it again. And now we're going to continue to scale and bring on the expertise, like people like Pankaj, like people like Paula, like people like Jorge, to be able to drive our technology platforms forward. We have revenue now, and we expect more revenue in the near term. We're very excited about the potential revenue associated with Tolovir. We think that it is inevitable that there's going to be a lot of interest in it, and that interest may turn into dollars relatively soon. And so, we're focused, and we may actually be hiring some business development to really, with government experience, to really drive that forward. And then, of course, we're going after huge markets. We're not going after small problems. We're going after big problems. And I think that's what the microcap space is for people with big dreams and willing to put in the work to achieve it. I think we've proven that we can deliver, and now our time is really coming soon to be able to get to that next level and get the recognition that we deserve for all the work that we've done. So I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I am willing to turn it over to be able to start to answer some questions.
Great presentation, as always, Gerald. Thank you so much. Wow, you really presented some great data today. And I also understand that you're looking for an EUA in Israel and possibly Greece. So in your opinion, what type of data are the health ministers of these countries looking for in an oral antiviral? And how do you see your chances in these countries?
Well, the data, I think it's a twofold question. That first one, in terms of an oral antiviral, in terms of any antiviral, oral or not, if you can show the data that we showed, I think you've got a very good shot of getting an EUA, because everybody wants their patients out of the hospital faster. Everybody wants their patients to not deteriorate. Everybody wants their patients not to die, because that's, it's money in terms of time in the hospital. Obviously, it's grief in terms of death. And then if they have long-term outcomes, then you have a drag on the system. So if you can help in those three areas with COVID-19, I think that that's phenomenal. The fact that we can do it with an oral that can also be administered, in a feeding tube, I think that really separates us from all the others. So we have a biology benefit and we have a delivery benefit. And now, we intend to really engage with the key partners that we have who are interfacing with those ministries of health in Greece and in Israel to drive this forward. So we think that this is the data they want to see. Some people may want to see more of this same data, but I don't really think the bar could, I think we've set the bar in terms of hospitalization data to date. I haven't seen anything that is better than this.
Thank you for that. So the regulatory pathways for approving a drug and botanical are different, right? So can you give us an idea of how much development time you save going the botanical pathway?
Right. So our first generation product will be, is going to be the botanical drug. The key with the botanical is you got to pick a botanical that's safe, because a huge part of the new chemical entity that you bring into the market is the safety that has to go on preclinically, and then the safety that you have to do in phase 1, and any safety signal that you see in phase 2 and phase 3. We don't have that problem. And so you kind of cut out a lot of that safety concerns. Obviously, you still monitor for that, but there are no known safety concerns with the botanicals we're using. So now it's all about efficacy. So in terms of efficacy, well, there's a reason why we stopped the study short. Even if, we went to 31 patients, there were deaths. There was obviously a concern that those deaths could be treatment related. Obviously, it was quite the opposite. The treatment appeared to be quite beneficial. And so the question became, why are you going to continue to go from 31 patients to 77 patients when, there's all this need out in the market now? So stop now, get what you can get in terms of EUAs now, and then prepare for a phase 2-3 study that will have an interim endpoint. So, we're still fine tuning what the sample size of that phase 2-3 study will be, but roughly halfway through, we're going to have an interim endpoint. The Pfizer drug was approved based on an interim endpoint. The Merck drug was approved based on an interim endpoint. And we think our drug, could be approved based on an interim endpoint as well, if we continue to show the data that we're showing here. So, for us, it's really just a matter of execution, both in terms of creating contracts with governments for people that like what they see now, as well as engaging to understand what people want to see for that next study. And that next study, whether it's on the interim endpoint or the final endpoint, we don't think we'll have to do another one to get approval in virtually any jurisdiction worldwide.
Great. So there are over 150,000 COVID-related hospitalizations in the U.S. today. So if your drug reduces hospital stays by 2.7 days, can you express what that would mean dollar-wise to the healthcare system? And what sort of daily savings are associated with reducing ICU stays?
Sure. Well, that's a very good question, because it's really two different and very significant markets. So one is, days in the ICU. So, once you get to the ICU, a lot of things have gone wrong, obviously. So when you're in the ICU, that is typically at least $25,000 a day. I've heard sometimes upwards of $100,000 a day, depending on what's going on in that ICU. So if you think about being able to reduce the time in the ICU by 3 days, it could be dramatic. When you think about the data that we showed, those patients who deteriorated and lasted a long time in the ICU before expiring, the longest patient in that study lasted 66 days on placebo in the ICU before expiring. 66 days, potentially at $100,000 a day, is millions of dollars. So if you can kind of put an upper end cap on that number, that is what's driving the healthcare costs associated with COVID hospitalization in the ICU. And that's what we think we can do with Tolovir. In terms of preventing people from getting to the ICU, that also, has very significant benefit, because just being in the hospital, on average is anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 a day. So if you can reduce that by, what did we say, an average of 7 days, you're talking there about a benefit of anywhere between $30,000 to $100,000. So, that has significant benefit if you think about the value of what we would be bringing by just those two things. And then obviously reduction in death, that's invaluable to the families and to the people. So we think the value that this can bring to the system is tremendous. And that's really why we've, despite all the challenges, the difficulties funding everything, we kind of kept steadfast and made sure to get to this data point, because now we see our hunch was right. Dr. Arad's hunch was right. The observational data was not a fluke, despite what people thought. And no, we really have a signal here. And so, we need to take this forward and get this to patients.
Thank you. So, Gerald, there's some intense competition in the oral antivirals. So what makes you think you can compete with the likes of Pfizer and Merck?
Well, the good thing about us is we're not really competing with Pfizer and Merck. That's one of the reasons we went after that. We think biologically, certainly Merck, we think, we would definitely outclass Merck. Pfizer, I think we would be probably comparable to Pfizer on the reduction in hospitalization, but we think that our patients would feel a lot better along the way because of the anti-cytokine activity and the ability to help with the symptoms. But we're not going after that market now. We're going after a market. Really, it's more remdesivir. That's really our competition. That's really the only COVID-19 antiviral that is part of the standard of care specific for COVID-19, even though it's not really specific for COVID-19. And there, we just showed data that our drug plus remdesivir is better than remdesivir alone. And if you did remove remdesivir, obviously we don't have that data. We don't know that that's necessarily important in the hospital setting, again, because the costs are such that combination therapy is well worth it if you can reduce time in the hospital and you can reduce people going on into the ICU and you can reduce death. So we don't necessarily view this necessarily as competition that we have to get rid of remdesivir, certainly not in the US market. We view this more as we can certainly add on to that market, and we don't see any pressure from payers or others that would withstand that if we continue to show the kind of data that we showed in these two studies. Now, in the developing world, as Dr. Mitchell mentioned this morning, they're a lot more price sensitive, and they have many fewer resources. So, a pill that you can take versus something where you have to go and get IV, that could have some very significant benefits. And so, as we look at the opportunity, it's quite large. And now with kids, starting to get infected, you hear a lot of stories about kids in the hospital and kids passing. It's very difficult to give kids some of these chemical drugs. There are a lot of side effects. But with our botanical, we don't have that issue. So we do think it's a big opportunity to be able to help, kids who have this. And as we mentioned, keeping people out of the hospital. And then the long COVID, which we predict is really going to become one of the largest chronic diseases in the world. And so, and the bad thing about long COVID is it's not just going to be long COVID. It's going to trigger a lot of other stuff. And so you want to get rid of it. If you have the virus inside of you, you don't want it hanging around. You want to get rid of it. We think it's critical you do it early. Don't wait around until something bad happens to then think about getting rid of it. There aren't a lot of tools to get rid of it right now, but we think we have some tools that we're bringing to market that can help.
Great. So Tolivir is a 3CL inhibitor, just like Pfizer's Paxlovid. So is this data that you just announced better than Pfizer's results? And can you compare the two drugs?
So it's difficult to compare the two drugs just because they're treated they were used in different study populations. So what we can say is from a protease inhibition activity perspective, while Pfizer's drug inhibits the protease in a stronger way, it's not clinically meaningfully stronger, i.e. people who take, products from us that look at protease inhibition for immune support in these kinds of settings, it doesn't seem like they do worse than the data that we saw from Pfizer. Quite the opposite. So we think that we can compare favorably. The bigger challenge is going to be manufacturing hundreds of millions of pills, which is ultimately what it's going to take to really tame the pandemic worldwide. That's one of the reasons why we didn't go after the early market with a botanical drug. There is the potential that some of our dietary supplement products, if they get enough data, could become OTC, and that's something we're looking at. But in terms of our our bread and butter Tolivir, that's really targeted at the later stage because it's more valuable there. People in the hospital who are dying, they need something. They have nothing now. And we think that we have a solution to this very serious problem.
Thank you. So this clinical trial took a lot of time and ended up enrolling patients that were sick with both the Alpha and Delta variants. So from what you can tell, should this work on the Omicron as well? Yeah,
absolutely. So in terms of 3CL protease inhibition, we know the earlier you treat, the less likely you are to deteriorate. I mean, Pfizer showed that. Once you kind of pass that window where the virus is the problem And then you've got the other issues related to cytokine storm that, lead to the hospital. That's where, the anti-cytokine component of our drug is important, and the antiviral, because it's a feedback loop. So, you have to reduce the cytokine and stop the thing that's increasing the cytokine at the same time to get out of the cycle. And that's what we think we're being able to see with our compound. So, yeah, absolutely. We think that this is the right approach, and we can have benefit across the board from prevention all the way to ICU intubated. We haven't seen a setting in COVID where we have not been able to have benefit.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, at least in the United States, the FDA, it's reticent to issue an EUA without manufacturing in place. And a lot of the drug makers, including Pfizer, they've been looking to increase manufacturing capacity. So, do you have the framework in place to make the drug, let alone meet that demand?
So I'll say that we definitely don't have the infrastructure in place to meet all the demand we expect for Tolivir, but we are putting it in place, and we've been putting it in place for a long time. So, as I mentioned, we have commercial products on the market that we manufacture today that you can buy now that are similar to the Tolivir product. So, we in a CGMP facility that is authorized by the FDA to produce botanical drugs, and we are looking at ramping up and potentially bringing our own facility at the right time in order to meet that next demand. So if the question is, if there are 100,000 patients in the U.S. now, 3,000 new patients every day, could we deliver 100,000 doses to get those 3,000 patients, or those 10,000 or 50,000 patients? Yes, we can meet that demand. There's no question. Would we be able to do it and meet the demand for people that want to stay out of the hospital? Probably. Could we do it for people ultimately going to be all the long COVIDs out there? Probably not. And for pediatrics, yes. So, we are going to have to do some prioritization of where the biggest need is, and how we can help the most. Certainly the hospital patients are critical, and both adults and kids. And then people at high risk of developing long COVID, once they become really symptomatic, that's certainly an area that's important. So, we're kind of in that position where we have a core where we're starting in the hospitalized setting, and we're going to kind of move out from that as we deliver and as we get more data. But we're not really concerned that we can't meet the demand. Pfizer only said they could only produce 20 million courses of treatment in 2022, and we think we can do that also.
Good to hear. So your other 3CL counterpart, Pfizer, stopped their phase 2 study early for efficacy after they showed a mortality benefit. Why did you stop the current study early and not finish it? And can you also talk about your plans for your future studies?
It's for the same reason. We had a mortality benefit. We had a time in the hospital benefit. We had a deterioration to mechanical ventilation benefit. We had benefit across the board. So it didn't make sense to continue the study if at the end of the study, we were still going to have to do another study. The data was strong enough that it made sense to just stop the study and move to the next study that could be pivotal in worldwide. So that's why we did it. It's very much the same reason, obviously just on a smaller scale with the hospitalized setting.
And Tolivir, so it's also a 3CL protease inhibitor. Explain the difference. We've got Tolivir maximum strength, Tolivir daily, and Tolivir. What's the difference?
Right. So, and again, it's important to reiterate, Tolivir and Tolivir daily are not approved for COVID-19, and they're not approved to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure any disease. From a protease inhibition perspective, if that's how you want to measure the activity, Pfizer, our Tolivir products, Tolivir daily, and then, you could look at ivermectin as another 3CL protease product that's much, much weaker. The difference is how strong it is. So if you look at, what happened in our clinical trial, initially, before Dr. Arad discovered the real driver of the effect from within the root that the quantum core identified, She thought that it was this compound NLC extract 2, which is out there. It's a known anti-cytokine compound that also does have 3CL protease inhibition activity, just like when you saw ivermectin out there with publications coming out showing that it inhibited the 3CL protease. So originally, when she took the mixture, she thought that was what was driving the bus, and people were getting better. And so, you give somebody something, they get better. And so then she thought that it was that compound. And the first cohort used a high concentration of only that NLC extract 2. Now, what happened along the way is that as we were doing quality control manufacturing for the dietary supplement products, we got a batch that was going to be for the Tolavid product, but it didn't pass specs. It didn't have the 3CL protease activity, despite having a high concentration of this NLC-EXT2. When that happened, light bulbs went off to say, maybe that isn't the compound, and maybe giving this high concentration of this compound that is not that great at inhibiting the 3CL protease isn't, going to have the right outcome in our trial. Luckily, by that time, it was the alpha wave and the beta wave, and at least in our study, the patients weren't that bad, so we didn't see any significant differences between the groups, the placebo versus the drug. But we stopped because we knew, the underlying biology eventually would catch up with us if we didn't fix it. So we went after the more potent 3CL protease inhibitor, and that's what's in our Tolavid product. But our Tolavid product does not have as much of the anti-cytokine. It is there, but not in the high concentration. So the Tolavir is really the best of both worlds. It has a very high concentration of the anti-cytokine and a high concentration of the 3CL protease inhibitor. And that is, that's what's driving it. The Tolavid daily has less of the potent 3CL protease inhibitor. And that's why it's not priced as high, because, the claim of the 3CL protease inhibition is really, I think, in our view, what people are paying for. They want to have comfort that they have a 3CL protease inhibitor if ever they need that maximum immune support. And so that's how we differentiated the products.
So we've got some more questions from our shareholders and viewers. What are the future drivers of your testing business?
Well, it's very clear. I mean, schools definitely testing, offices are definitely testing, and as the administration was pushing the vaccine or test mandate, obviously a lot of places started to get ready for that, and as Omicron hit, people started to say, well, vaccinated or not vaccinated, it didn't really matter. Everyone was getting sick, and so you needed to test. And so, regardless of whether there was a mandate or not, people don't want COVID-19 in their workforce because if their people get sick, they get long COVID, they go on long-term disability. I mean, it's a problem, right? I mean, ultimately, that's what's going to drive the adoption of testing, because people don't, it's not that they think they're going to die with Omicron, it's that you think you're going to get long COVID. And so that is, that's the risk. So, all of these different centers where people are going to be meeting on a daily basis, where you can have a lot of transmission in a short period of time, testing is the key. We saw the administration scramble to buy 500 million tests, and then another 500 million tests, and then they requalified a bunch of tests that weren't qualified anymore. And at the end of the day, now they're sending tests out by the post office. You get your rapid test in 3 weeks. So the issues are the issues, and the reality is that you're going to need accurate testing now. And the way you're going to get accurate testing now is you're going to go to your local lab and get tested, or you're going to go to some place that takes it to a local lab to get your results relatively quickly. That was always our bet. It took time to materialize, but it was inevitable that there was going to be a variant that overcame the vaccine. That's the only way you're going to get a new variant now. It has to overcome the vaccines. So, otherwise it's not going to become a new variant of concern. So, that's the future now. And now, we've come to the stage where we're starting to develop, a vaccine for a variant. I'm not sure that's a great strategy because we already have the second Omicron that's out there. So, you developed a vaccine to the first Omicron. The second one's already taken over. By the time it's approved, Omicron may not be around. So, you want to test people. And then if they have it, then you want to give them a pill. I think Pfizer thinks that. That's why they went with the pills. As Dr. Arad mentioned, Auguron, the company that Pfizer owns that developed the pills, Dr. Arad knows them for years. In fact, there's a long history there. So, we're highly confident that we're in the right place at the right time with the right product.
Great. Talk a little bit about your strategic vision for your nutraceutical business.
Well, for the dietary supplement business, it's clear we have an anchor, right? So we've got this 3-CL protease inhibition activity. As a company, we've specialized in the 3-CL protease, and we have 3-CL protease drug candidates. And we have 3-CL protease tests. So, with that profile, we can now anchor other things onto the 3-CL protease to give a better or a more robust supplement experience to consumers. So whether that's going to be adding vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, whether that's going to be adding certain cannabinoids that, seem to show some promise in various afflictions out there, including some of the same ones that 3-CL protease impacts. We think that, creating premium products that people feel benefit from immediately is the key. If you take something and they tell you it's great, but you don't feel better, it's not a lot of help. But, if you take a product and you feel better, and certainly from what we're hearing from everybody that we talk to, is people feel better when they take our product. I think that's really what it boils down to. And I think we can build upon this really unique base that we have to create unique products and become a significant player in that marketplace.
So when will you be able to start providing revenue guidance on the Tolavid business?
Well, it's a good question. Right now, we don't know the guidance because it's growing so rapidly, and we don't know if that's a transient growth or if that's going to be, sustained growth. So I can say that in January, we've done already more than half of what we did for all of 2021. We haven't even started marketing. And now, obviously, we're gaining recognition with our 3-CL protease inhibitor brand, the Tolo brand, as being a reliable source of 3-CL protease inhibition activity. We think that message is very few people have heard it. And we now have enough supply that we can tell it and not fear selling out. That plays into our whole overall strategy of making sure that we didn't go out there and try and sell something we couldn't deliver. But now we can deliver. We deliver every day. And so we can build the brand and it becomes self-reinforcing because we can take the money, buy more product, build the brand, buy more product. So we're kind of entering that virtuous cycle. And we think word of mouth is going to be quite significant. And obviously we are spending some money on marketing with the Super Bowl experience, which we think will bring a lot of eyeballs and may bring some pretty hefty players in front of us. So, we'll raise the visibility definitely in the months ahead.
Great. Explain the difference between ivermectin and Tolavid.
Well, ivermectin is a drug. So it's a pharmaceutical drug. It's an antibacterial drug that also has some 3-CL protease activity. So, it's not intended for the treatment of COVID-19. But if you look exclusively at the 3-CL protease inhibition activity, it is relatively weak, but it does have some activity. Our dietary supplement products, both Tolavid Daily, it's about 2.5 times as strong, and Tolavid is about 25 times as strong in terms of its inhibition activity. So the binding to the 3-CL protease to get the protease out of the system, right? So 25x is a big number. And so, we also recommend higher dosing with our Tolavid than ivermectin would be dosed. So now you're talking about maybe not 25x, maybe talking about 100x protease inhibition depending on the quantity of Tolavid that you're taking and the quantity of Tolavid daily that you're taking. So, from our perspective, it's not even close. They're not in the same conversation.
So how do you plan on commercializing the Tolo test?
Well, it's all about, taking that biology now, which I think 3-cell protease biology is it's become pretty canonical now in coronavirus and COVID-19 biology, and we have to turn it into commercial product. So we have been commercializing, or we intend to commercialize most of our products out of CLIA lab, so central lab model. That's not really viable for the Tolo test from biological reasons as well as practical reasons. You want to take the test at the place where you are. So the value of this test is that it can have molecular sensitivity at the point of care. So the question at the point of care is, okay, is it a single use? Is it, for in your office, 10, 15 people, or are you talking about airports and schools and office buildings? And we're developing products for each of those use cases. And each one is a little different. If you're at an airport, there's going to be tracking systems associated with it. If you're at your house, it's not going to be that important. It could be simply like a rapid test with an extra band of the 3-cell protease and on top of or in replacement of the antigen test. So, those prototypes and then the evaluation of those prototypes in clinical studies is the next phase for the Tolo test. There are definitely partnerships that we see on the horizon for Tolo test. And unfortunately, it has not been prioritized, but it is something that I think, testing just became a big issue again in the last 2 months. I think people are realizing all the deficiencies. And so I do think that people are going to be looking for better solutions than what's out there. And now we're going to be in a position to be able to deliver.
Great. So does a neutralizing antibody test work for Omicron?
Yeah. So if the question is, will you be able to tell if an Omicron infection produces neutralizing antibodies by titers by using CPAS? The answer is yes. Will the CPAS tell you that you have enough titers of, say, a vaccine or a Delta-induced neutralizing antibody production to overcome an Omicron infection? The answer is no. So, it's not clear yet what the titers are, if there are titers. I mean, people are saying there are, but I think the real world experience is that a lot of people who are vaccinated and boosted are still getting Omicron. And it's not clear why some are and some aren't. And it doesn't appear to be necessarily correlated to the neutralizing antibody titers. But, if you had Omicron and you didn't have antibodies before, can you take the CPAS neutralizing antibody test and tell whether you have antibodies now? Yes. Is it likely that if you have those neutralizing antibodies, that those will neutralize Omicron? Yes. There is a lot of variability in response to Omicron. So it is not a guarantee that if you have Omicron, you have protection against getting Omicron again. And the hypothesis is that you've downregulated your immune system. And so you're not actually producing enough T cells and B cells and neutralizing antibody titers. So if you were completely vaccine naive, you didn't have an immune imprint of some prior strain, and you were just getting Omicron for the first time, you would obviously produce antibodies to Omicron, and we would be able to test those antibodies. And if you have high antibody titers, then we could likely tell you, yes, you have a good degree of protection against Omicron, and that protection would likely be better than the vaccine. With that said, there's a lot of ifs there because almost everybody's had something, whether it's Delta, Alpha, Beta, or the vaccine, and the immune imprinting does impact at least early on, the antibodies produced, which is why vaccine-induced immunity or Delta-induced immunity doesn't protect against Omicron because, you haven't produced Omicron antibodies early on. So
let's talk about the operating margins. Do you expect to see with Provista over the next year or two? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So, obviously, when we talk about Provista, the objective is really talking about right now ramping PCR testing. I mean, there's just so much demand for PCR testing. that, we can talk about other things, but, at the end of the day, that's where the money is. So the operating margins there are quite significant. So, because we're a distributor, so we actually distribute to other labs. We have distributor pricing, so we don't pay retail pricing for our products. We buy at distributor prices. So that gives us, we probably pay half or less than half of what labs would typically pay for their products. And we've invested heavily in capital equipment to automate. So, we have higher capacity with lower personnel costs. So the margins, on a $100 PCR test, if we're direct billing insurance for that test, I mean, you could see 80% margins or 85 or even 90% margins very easily, just depending on the level of reimbursement, whether it's 75, 90, 100. And if we're doing the collection, there's another $23 added on top of that. They're quite significant margins for PCR testing. For neutralizing antibody testing, the margins are also pretty good. You get about $80 reimbursement. If you do it in combination with another IgG, IgM test, you get $120 total, which there is some medical benefit to that, but it's a little nuanced. And then the costs, net, we can see 75 to 80% margins very easily in that business. So there's a lot of margin, but there's obviously a lot of volume, so you got to reinvest to continue to build the business and provide the service. And there is a time cycle to getting paid by insurance or by Medicare. So Medicare usually pays in about 18 days. Insurance is anywhere between 30 and 45 days. And if you get pushback or questions or there's forms missing, you can be at 90 days. And so, there's that payer mix and being able to continue to manage that with your billing team. But, we've been building up those operations to be able to make sure that we stay on top of it.
Great. So will you be initiating partnership discussions with Big Pharma if Tolovir results are positive?
Well, Tolovir results were positive, and I can't comment on, partnership discussions.
Okay. Will the company be testing Tolovir in the outpatient setting?
That is going to be the plan. Yes. The question is the timing. The priority is getting the hospitalized into the market. If, we get the support needed to expand beyond the hospitalized, which remain focused, then absolutely, we think that we can go after, as I mentioned, pediatric, moderate, long COVID. And then the question is, which is the prioritization? And again, that's the kind of conversation you want to have with, key people in government as to where they see the need.
And so how long might it take to complete the pivotal trial?
Well, that's a good question. So, we're going to be moving very rapidly to, engage with regulators, discuss our study design. We already have, trial designs established. And we have now, obviously, a clinical development team that was able to execute the last study. And now with this data, there's a lot more excitement of people wanting to do studies with us. So, we think that data, and that's one of the other reasons why we wanted to stop the study and start a new study is, we only had a couple of centers. Now, when we go to people and say, look, we want to do a study, people are they're going to be very excited because they've seen some data. So, reasonably, we should be starting it no later than Q2, hopefully starting it in Q1. And then it's about how quickly we can enroll. The patients are, as you saw on the chart, the patients are discharged in our treatment group within 10 days. Typically, at least in the Delta wave, it was about 17 days. In the placebo arm, in Omicron, it's an interesting mix because a lot of people going to the hospital are reinfections. So reinfections are really skewing things quite a bit. And so we don't know exactly what the patient population is going to be like. But you can imagine that, total study is going to be no more than 3 weeks each patient. And we might need, 200 patients, 250. We're still fine-tuning that statistical analysis plan so we can get the sample size needed to get the power. But we will have that soon. The team is already working on it. And then we don't think it's going to be a problem. There's plenty of hospitalizations now, and we don't see the likelihood that that's going to go down, given that now we have a very clear immune escape variant, and there's no horizon in the near term for any kind of intervention that's going to stop the spread. So we're kind of back in 2020 from a spread perspective, except restrictions are down, masks are down, distancing is down, schools are open. So there's going to be people in the hospital. So I think, we went through waves, long Sahara Desert type waves of no patients in Israel with the success of their vaccine campaign. That's unlikely to be the case again. So we think that recruiting in the hospital is going to be much easier going forward.
Okay. So in planning your phase 3, what will the clinical endpoints you're going to be looking at? What are you going to be looking at when it comes to the clinical endpoints?
So the clinical endpoints that we looked at in the last trial are the approvable endpoints that we will look at in the next trial. Time to stable disease, time in the hospital, and death. Deterioration to mechanical ventilation, time on mechanical ventilation, deterioration to supplemental oxygen, and then time on supplemental oxygen. And then you combine that with the biomarkers, which we're analyzing, because we have some ideas that our compounds could be helpful in ways that others aren't with respect to biomarkers. And so, we're looking to glean some of that from this data and then really build a robust plan in the next data set to tease that out.
So is Todos structured as a holding company in the U.S. with Provista, the JV, and other previous elements in your growth stories as subsidiaries? So this will be important for tax accounting and other future acquisition purposes, correct? Particularly for the treatment of goodwill and merger of equal versus outright acquisition. What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that my CFO really manages most of that, but yeah, absolutely. It is structured that way. We're not trying to run it that way. So our Corona Diagnostics teams works closely with our Provista team. Obviously, servicing labs, it's a lot easier to do that when you have a lab. You can train people because you have techs. Those kinds of things. You have a big benefit when you're servicing a client that is in the industry in which you have a significant amount of expertise. Tolavid, and Tolavir, I mean, there is ultimately going to be a link to testing. That's the way it is. Especially, you see Pfizer's compound, you need to have a positive test before you can get it. We do think that, that kind of thing is going to be similar with our other products. And certainly from a marketing team perspective, people who are concerned about, immune deficiencies or immune problems or COVID, yeah, it's the same person. If you're out there looking for immune support, you're probably out there looking for a test. So in some form or fashion. So, there's definitely a lot of cross function that we are able to bring because of the concentration of our, end user base.
So talk about, do you have an underwriter or advisor for a NASDAQ listing? And how is that progressing in terms of an anticipated time frame?
So we have retained an investment bank to do our NASDAQ listing. We are being very diligent with regards to the timing because we got revenue coming in. And I've been asked this question a lot, what about the revenue? Well, a lot of the revenue went to fund the clinical trial. And I understand that that's frustrating, but we do think that the clinical trial itself is extremely important, and it opens up itself tremendous revenue opportunity in the treatment of a hospitalized setting when you can reduce days in the hospital by 7 days. That's extremely valuable. That was a bet we made. The bet we made was that if the bet made is that the data was good, and that if it was good and if it showed this kind of benefit, then the pricing of the Tolavir based on the data, we're going after remdesivir. As you noted, there's 150,000 people in the hospital today in the United States, and all across the world, hospitalizations are going up or stabilizing high. this is going to be a problem for a long time. We think that the revenue that we can generate from that product is quite significant, and it can overcome any of the dilution we've experienced to date because we're talking about big numbers. And we also think that as people understand that, so now it's really a marketing exercise, which is one of the reasons we've been out there. We've been out there on national TV talking to people. We're going to continue to do that because as people become aware that guess what, there are solutions. You don't just have to hope you don't get the virus, and if you get the virus, stay at home and drink tea. There's other options potentially, and that people are looking for those options and looking for that safety net, that product that you have in your medicine cabinet just in case. I think that's something that people haven't thought about for a while, but that's definitely the profile of buyer of some of our products.
Makes sense. So have you begun the process for a US-based clinical trial of Tolovir yet? And if so, tell us about the steps you've taken so far. And you have Gerald, correct?
Well, we have not. The next official step is to have a pre-IND meeting with the FDA. We wanted to wait until we have the current data because they'll take us a lot more seriously than just with some observational data. And now we've built up, a highly credible clinical team to take us forward. So the next step is a pre-IND meeting. We're already starting on the IND, document that is, and the clinical study design. Those are going to be key documents to engage with the FDA around a botanical drug IND. And then obviously we have clinical investigators that we are close with here in the US that could be the sites for some of the studies that we're talking about, both, from a botanical drug as well as from an OTC perspective. So yes, we are, we're taking this seriously. Obviously, this is a very serious business, and we will be able to come out with let's call it a roadmap for how we see our engagement with the FDA in the months ahead. It's been highly variable. I remember speaking with some key advisors, some very senior people in CROs 6 months ago, and COVID was over. Why would anybody spend money developing a pill? And nobody's in the hospital. Why are you doing this? Things change. So now obviously drug development takes a long time, and you have to be in the right place at the right time. And it's not lucky that Omicron came along. Obviously, it's a terrible, terrible thing, but it was relatively predictable, and so we put ourselves in a position to be successful.
Smart. So how were the biomarkers affected by Tolovir?
So we haven't done a full biomarker analysis. We did show some data, and I'll show it again here. Let me see if we can open that up a little bit. So if you look at the C-reactive protein, again, these are small n's. There's a lot of work that was being done at the clinical site, so not everything was completed, but we got all the clinical data in, which was the key. We see, we just measured at day 10 because getting into a lot of box and whisker plots about how things change over time would be challenging to communicate. But suffice it to say, you entered the study because you were in the hospital. Or you're in a hospitalization. Typically, people who are hospitalized have high markers, and this is well published in the literature. And so the question is, how do you keep the markers down if they're not high, or how do you reduce the markers if they are high? And placebo or drug obviously has the same opportunity to do that. And at the end of the day, you look at the C-reactive protein, the mean is 3.4 in the treated group versus 14 in the placebo. You look at IL-6 was 24 in the treated group versus 36 in the placebo. And the D-dimer, all those small n's, was, that's actually 2,500. There's a missing 5 there. So it's 2,558 versus 29,000. So, you see a very significant benefit of the treatment. Now, it's not big enough to draw conclusions as it relates to this from a statistical perspective, but certainly the signal is there and the trend is very much in the right direction.
So without getting into too many specifics, have you heard any interest from potential partners to help take Tolovir to the next level? And has Todos been reaching out to partners, or are you waiting on them to reach out to you?
So we've had ad hoc conversations with partners. We are engaged with, a number of potential partners. We do have a partner, in Europe right now, as you know, and they are pretty close to the Greek government. So now that we have the data, and again, the data came out this morning. Now that we have the data, definitely there's going to be a very significant business development exercise, because the question for us is going to be, where do we want to focus our partnering resources? Obviously, the United States is a huge market. There's huge markets in Europe. There's large markets in South America. I mean, there's large markets everywhere for something that can reduce death and reduce time in the hospital and reduce mechanical ventilation. So I think, from a business perspective, the question is going to be, where does it make the most sense, time invested to get the approval versus revenue from the approval, and then cash flow. So if you can get an approval now and generate cash flow now, that might be more valuable to us to be able to reinvest and get, clinical development work done with profits from that, kind of interaction to build out something that maybe could be larger, more lucrative, but is going to take longer. And so, we're going through those kind of discussions and kind of thought processes now. We do see, large market opportunities, but at this point, I think it'd be premature to kind of give any guidance or say what we think is going to happen. I think, we just got the data today. We're going to let our clinical team continue to complete the full, evaluation. We're going to move forward with our regulatory interactions. That's also another key aspect of partnerships. It's not just that you have data, it's how close are you with the FDA, what's going on, and then that can have a proxy on other jurisdictions. Well, if the FDA is doing something, for example, with our dietary supplements, there's a lot of interest because the FDA has authorized it. And so, people say, well, if the FDA authorized it, I really should be looking at this. Similarly, our botanical drug product, we are likely to start to get, some more street credibility because now we have controlled data. So we're formulating that strategy, and we're going to be bringing on folks to help execute that strategy, because there's only so much, I can do. But we see a lot of benefit in terms of how things are moving forward.
Great. We have a congratulations on your Tolovir phase 2 results. Question from them: when will you start enrolling for phase 2/3? Also, how many COVID PCR tests were processed by your Provista lab this past December of 2021?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think we were somewhere north of 25, 30, maybe about 35,000, I think. I got to go look at the numbers. But it was, in the tens of thousands. It was not in the hundreds of thousands, but it was in the tens of thousands. In terms of, what was the first question as it related to Tolovir?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. When will you start enrolling for phase 2/3?
Well, that's not 100% clear yet. Obviously, the fastest is Israel, right? So, Shahid Zedek is a great center. The PI was great. Ariel Rocca was great. The people that worked there were great. We definitely appreciate the relationship, and obviously they're allowing the product to be used on a compassionate use basis there. So they appreciate the relationship back. And we think that, patients over there are very lucky. In terms of, that's the natural place to start. And then to build upon that, because it is an internationally recognized center, and then to build out our data from there. So, realistically, we can start very quickly, because we already have the clinical infrastructure. We already have a clinical team. We already have CRAs on site. We already know who the PI is. And then it's a very credible place, and we can, build multi-center study around Shaizadek. So that's going to be where we start the timing of that. Again, we do want to have some level of certainty as it relates to non-Israeli jurisdictions wanting to look at this. And even if, there is obviously potentially going to be the challenge of if you get an EUA in Israel, who the hell is going to want placebo? So there are a few things we have to think about. But again, this is why we've brought on a team of experts to help us do that.
Great. Do you anticipate applying for emergency approval on Tolovir soon?
Yeah, we do. We will be engaging in those discussions, yes. Not in the U.S. We have to get the IND first, but ex-U.S., absolutely.
And is there any animal use for your product in the future?
Probably, but we need to save all of the material for humans.
Do you think the growth of at-home COVID testing can become a threat to Provista's revenue long-term?
I think it's synergistic. I mean, look, I don't know about you, but, if I go out and someone says, oh, I just tested negative by rapid test, I don't really get warm and fuzzy. The reality is there's just challenges on the biology with rapid tests. They're a heck of a lot better than nothing. With that being said, I think everybody on this call knows somebody who tested negative by rapid but ended up being positive. So, it's just one of the challenges that we have. There's going to continue to be a demand for people who want to know that they don't have COVID and that they're with people who don't have COVID. And because of that, PCR testing is key. The problem with PCR testing is the logistics. You have to get the answer fast, because if you don't get it fast, it becomes a heck of a lot less useful. So I think that's where the focus has to be, is getting local labs to be able to do the testing and get results quickly to patients. If we can do that, at-home testing becomes less relevant, but there's certainly a place for it. I have rapid tests. I've had rapid tests, in my house since the summer of 2020, and they've served us well. So, I don't want to take anything away from them. With that being said, I also have PCR tests I can send to my lab, and I can get an answer in 12 to 24 hours. And I feel a lot more comfortable with that.
Great. So what do you think it'll take to bring Tolovir news to the major mainstream media and news outlets regarding decreased hospital stay, no hospital deaths, robust decrease in inflammatory markers, an excellent safety profile, to name a few? So, and also with the limited resources, how does the company fund phase 2, 3, and the 5 developmental trials? One last question, is the company planning to approach FTC to allow COVID language?
Okay, on that last question, that is one of the reasons why we're evaluating doing some kind of real-world data gathering. So I'm sure there's people on the call who've taken our Tolovir products. We will be reaching out to you through the platforms that we have available to us to know about your experience, and hopefully that your data can be included in some of the work. With regards to the development of bringing Tolovir into the market, yeah, it's going to be expensive, but not that expensive, because these patients who are on in the hospital, someone's already paying for them, and they're highly motivated, and as are the hospitals. I think everybody understands just the tremendous strain for healthcare workers right now in the U.S. and other parts of the world, with just the tremendous demand on their resources. So we think that there will be opportunities to have lower cost ways of getting the data now that there's a lot of interest, and we do think that there are likely to be new funding sources as a result of the data you guys see on the screen now. So I'll say that. And then what was the first question as it related to that?
Well, you pretty much answered that. The second question was, how does the company fund phase 2, 3, and the 5 developmental trials?
Well, it's going to be done stepwise. So we're not planning to launch 6 clinical studies right now. That's not our strategy. So our strategy is to focus where we have data and take it across the finish line and then expand. If we're able to gather the capital at a valuation that makes sense for our shareholders, including in 3CL Sciences, which could be decoupled from the parent company's market cap, then then there may be a lot of resources. And we do have some key advisors in Europe with some very, very strong relationships with some very important people who are very interested in seeing solutions to the pandemic. And this data that you see on the screen is raising a lot of eyebrows. So, we'll see what happens. Again, today's day one. But we're not starting from scratch. We thought about positioning ourselves for a long time, as everybody on the call knows. Been very vocal on Twitter in terms of, thinking that, we're not going to dance around this virus with, immunity. We're going to have to kill it. And I think, more and more people are coming around to that way of thinking, and it's going to be a watershed moment when it happens. So I think the resources will be there, provided that we have the right product. So we're going to continue to focus on the fundamentals and making sure that we don't do anything to damage our product. We don't do anything to damage the brand. We don't run afoul of FTC. We don't run afoul of FDA. And we stay strictly focused on the science and the medical benefit, and engage with the types of people that really want to see these products come to market.
Thank you. Are the main ingredients in Tolavid and Tolavir the same?
Some of that's proprietary information. What I can say is that the source is the same. If you look at what's the data? Here's the data. Obviously, the Tolavir inhibition is stronger than the Tolavid inhibition. And again, the Tolavid daily inhibition is an order of magnitude weaker than the Tolavid. So that means they're not the same. But that doesn't mean that they're not similar. And so what we've been trying to do is, as we qualify material, as we identify the right sources of material that allow us to have a high degree of comfort that, we're bringing on stuff that, will meet our specs, which are very stringent. We feel as though, you can get a significant 3CL protease inhibition outcome with Tolavid. With Tolavir, you're not only getting an exquisite 3CL protease inhibition outcome, you're also getting a very strong anti-cytokine outcome. I don't think you're getting, quite that outcome from the Tolavid. And certainly, if you're in the hospital, you want the best. And the best is what's going to get you the data that you guys saw on that screen. So, they're different products. They're definitely different products, but they're both good products with different use cases.
Great. Do you have any plans for an insider share repurchase?
Do I plan to buy? Yeah, I do plan to buy. Am I going to force everybody else to buy? That's not necessarily on the table, although I do know that there are people who are interested. We still do have a lot of data, and other pieces of the puzzle that are not public, but I think there are windows where we'll be able to do stuff. Right now, I think the biggest challenge is we are in the middle of an audit. So, obviously I know the numbers. And so, there's certain periods where I can't do stuff, but, our accounting team is definitely stepped up and is much tighter than it has been in the past. So hopefully, we'll be able and in a position to do something sooner than others.
Last question about this. Someone's having Tolavid shipped from the distribution center in the U.S. to a Canadian destination. The question is, during travel, there is a potential for the Tolavid to freeze. So will that affect the product quality?
I mean, we haven't seen that. I mean, it's shipped to cold places here too in the U.S.
Okay.
So no, I mean, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that when we've shipped some product to Israel and it's, sat in the customs for 4 days in the baking sun. No, we haven't seen that. But and we've obviously we've done stability studies because you don't get a product through the FDA without studies. It's not you don't just slap something together in a certificate of free sale. So we've done the studies. Now we're very comfortable. We can ship it commercially in reasonable conditions. If you get stuck into Antarctica, will there be a problem? I don't think so. Should you let it thaw before that happens? Probably. But we've not heard or seen anything like that. There's a desiccant in there and it's sealed when it's shipped. So the likelihood that there's going to be damage is low.
We have had so many compliments to you, Gerald. I'm just going to read a few. There have been so many in here. Thank you, Gerald, for another fantastic presentation and update on your results. In addition to the long list of questions that can take us into tomorrow, we will email you. Don't worry. Here's something from someone. He says, my dad passed this morning from COVID, and I appreciate all you're doing. We have a lot of congratulations on your results. Plus, Gerald, you've had a very long day. Take some good rest, and we trust you and your sincere efforts. So if you have any closing remarks, Gerald, we've got tons of questions we're going to send to you, but what would you like to say to end this presentation?
Well, just, would like to thank everyone for continuing to, at least watch and hopefully become a part of the journey. We know it's been tough times. Being in the OTC markets and trying to do what we're trying to do, with these big ideas is not easy. And certainly being a shareholder has its challenges, disappointed today, just like everybody else, in terms of what happened in the market. But at the end of the day, what I've learned is that volume overcomes everything. And we can, as long as we continue to execute and we stay topical and we have the right stuff, which I think we have. I think we can win. So, that's the focus. And, some days you lose, but, we're going to keep fighting.
Great. Well, you're doing some really great, important work. So thank you so much. All right, everyone. On behalf of all of us at Emerging Growth, thank you, Todos Medical, and all your executives and shareholders and our viewers for a fantastic and informative presentation. So remember, in just a minute, you're going to be redirected to the registration page for the next conference, which is this Wednesday. So be sure to stay on to reserve your spot early. As always, a complete replay of this event will be made available on the Emerging Growth Conference YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. Also, we're on Twitter at Emerging Growth C. We always post new information to Twitter first. So I'm Anna Berry. On behalf of myself and everyone who made this event possible, we wish you a great, safe, and successful week, and we'll see you at our next Emerging Growth Conference. Thank you again, Gerald, and thank you, Todos Medical.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.